He thought he'd taken everything she had, but he forgot about the one place he never knew existed and what her father had hidden inside. If you've ever felt like you've been erased from your own life, if you've ever had to start over from nothing, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're going to talk about what it means to rebuild. The silence in the apartment was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't an empty silence, the peaceful kind that settles after a long day. It was a hollowed-out silence, a violent quiet that echoes in the space where things used to be. Mark was gone, and with him, everything else. The sofa we'd picked out together, its cushions still holding the faint indentation of where we used to sit. The heavy oak dining table we'd inherited from his grandmother, the one I'd painstakingly refinished myself. The books, the art, the rugs, even the forks. He'd taken the forks. A part of my mind, the part that was still trying to find humor in the abyss, found that detail particularly absurd. Who takes the forks? It was a level of petty I hadn't known he possessed, a final, scraping injury designed to say, "You will not even be able to feed yourself in the world I am leaving you to." I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards. Ghost impressions were everywhere. Lighter squares on the walls where our photos had hung. Faint scuff marks where the legs of the bed had been. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene, and the victim was the life I thought I had. 2 years of marriage, 5 years of a life entwined, all of it packed into a moving truck and driven away, leaving behind nothing but dust and the smell of industrial cleaner. The legal papers had called it an equitable distribution of assets. A clean break. It felt more like an amputation without anesthetic. He had the job, the money, the lawyer who could turn words into weapons. I had a soon-to-be terminated lease and a bank account that was a flatlining joke. I was 26 years old, and I had been rendered a ghost in my own story. I slid down a wall in the living room, the cool plaster a shock against my back, and just sat there listening to the silent scream. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a phantom limb twitching. I knew it was him. I didn't have to look, but I did. One last message. Keys are on the counter. Don't try to contact me again. My lawyer will handle any further communication. Not, I'm sorry, not, I wish you the best. Just a sterile, corporate sign-off to a shared life. I didn't cry. I think I'd used up all my tears during the long, grinding months of the divorce. What was left was a strange, brittle numbness. A feeling of being scooped out, like a pumpkin before Halloween. Days bled into one another. The eviction notice arrived, a crisp, official document that felt like another nail being hammered into a coffin. I had 30 days. I spent the first week sleeping on a yoga mat and eating cheap takeout from cartons, using the plastic cutlery they provided. The absurdity of the forks was a constant, dull ache. I started packing the few things he'd left behind. My clothes, some worn-out paperbacks, a box of personal trinkets he'd deemed worthless. It was in the back of the hall closet, behind a broken vacuum cleaner, that I found it. A single, sturdy cardboard box sealed with yellowed packing tape. On the side, in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting, was my name, Ilera. I didn't remember packing it when I'd moved in with Mark. I didn't remember seeing it at all. It must have come from my father's house after he passed away 3 years ago, a stray piece of flotsam from that shipwreck of a time, and I just shoved it into the closet, too numb with grief then to deal with it, too wrapped up in my new life with Mark to look back. My father and I had a complicated relationship. He was a man of few words and fewer affections, a mechanic and a tinkerer who was more comfortable with grease and steel than he ever was with a hug. After my mom died, it was just the two of us, rattling around in a small house that always smelled of oil and sawdust. He was a good provider, but not a gentleman. He disapproved of Mark from the beginning. "He's too smooth, Ellie," he'd said once, wiping his hands on a rag. "A man with no calluses on his hands has no grip on reality." I dismissed it as the old-fashioned grumbling of a man who didn't understand our world. Now, the memory felt like a shard of glass in my gut. He'd seen something I hadn't. He tried to warn me. I ran my fingers over the faded ink of my name. For a moment, it felt like he was in the room, his quiet, heavy presence a comfort I hadn't realized I'd missed so profoundly. With a sense of detached curiosity, I pulled the box into the empty living room. The tape was brittle and cracked as I peeled it away. The smell that rose up was pure Dad. Dust, old paper, and the faint, metallic tang of his workshop. Inside, it was a jumble. A few of his old flannel shirts, a chipped coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad," a worn leather-bound copy of a book on engine repair, and underneath it all, a large, heavy manila envelope. It felt strangely important. The paper was thick and stiff, the kind used for official documents. My name was on the front, again in his handwriting, but this time it was followed by the word "personal." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were two things. The first was a key. It was old and heavy, made of ornate iron, the kind you see for castle doors in movies. It was attached to a simple brass tag with a single word stamped into it, "Barn." The second was a sheaf of papers, folded and held together by a rusty paperclip. I unfolded them. My eyes scanned the legalese, the dense paragraphs of boilerplate text, but a few words jumped out, clear as day. Quitclaim deed, County of Silver Creek, and my own name, Ilera Vance, listed as the sole grantee. It was a deed to a piece of property I had never heard of in a county I barely knew existed. It was dated 5 years ago, right after I'd announced my engagement to Mark. My father had transferred this property into my name, and he had never, ever said a word about it. I sat on the floor, the papers spread out around me, the heavy iron key cold in my palm. The silence in the apartment was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer just an absence. It was a question. The next day, I called the number for the county clerk's office listed on the deed. A tired-sounding woman confirmed it. The property at Lot 7, Ridge Road, was indeed registered in my name. She also confirmed the taxes were delinquent. 2 years' worth. Another year, and it'll go to a tax auction. "Honey," she said, her voice a mixture of boredom and pity. "You've got about 6 months." The amount she quoted wasn't astronomical, but to me, it might as well have been $1 million. Still, it was something. A thread in a life that had been completely unraveled. It was a single, tangible thread. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity. I sold the few things of value I had left. A pair of earrings my grandmother had given me, my laptop, for enough cash to buy a bus ticket and pay a small fraction of the back taxes, a gesture to the county that I wasn't abandoning the property. I packed my clothes into 2 duffel bags. I left the keys on the counter, just as Mark had. I walked out of that apartment, that mausoleum of a dead marriage, and didn't look back. The bus ride was a descent into another world. The gleaming skyscrapers of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to strip malls, then finally to the cracked asphalt and Rust Belt towns of the forgotten countryside. The landscape grew flatter, browner. The sky seemed bigger, more indifferent. I watched the miles tick by, each one a small severance from the person I had been. Who was I now? I was a woman with 2 duffel bags, a dwindling pile of cash, and a mysterious key to a barn in a place called Silver Creek. It wasn't much of a plan. It wasn't a plan at all. It was an act of pure desperation, a leap into the dark based on the last cryptic gesture of a man I'd never fully understood. My father. He hadn't given me a wedding gift. He'd just shaken Mark's hand with a grim look on his face. This, I realized, was his wedding gift, a secret lifeboat he'd built for me, hoping I'd never have to use it. The thought brought the first real tears I'd shed in weeks. They weren't tears of sadness for my failed marriage. They were tears of a complex, aching grief for my father, for the love he'd shown in the only way he knew how, with deeds, not words. The bus let me off at crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. The town of Silver Creek wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a boarded-up general store. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. It was late afternoon, and the light was golden and heavy, casting long shadows across the road. I checked the crumpled map I'd printed out. Ridge Road was another 2 miles out. There were no taxis, no Ubers, no one called. So I started walking, my duffel bags slung over my shoulders, kicking up dust with every step. The road climbed steadily, winding through thick stands of pine and oak. The houses were few and far between, small, weathered farmhouses with peeling paint and sagging porches. It was quiet. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the gravel shoulder and the whisper of the wind in the trees. Finally, I saw it. A rusted, half-fallen mailbox with the number 7 barely visible beneath the rust. A gravel driveway, more weeds and gravel, disappeared into a dark canopy of trees. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. I walked up the driveway, the trees closing in around me, their branches forming a tunnel. And then it opened up into a clearing. What was left of a house stood to the left, its roof caved in, windows like vacant eyes. It was a skeleton, picked clean by time and weather. My hope, which had been a tiny, flickering flame, sputtered. This was it, a ruin? But then I saw it, set back from the house, larger and more solid than I'd imagined. The barn. It was huge, a classic gambrel roof structure made of dark, weathered wood. The paint was long gone, bleached to a silvery gray by decades of sun and snow. One of the big sliding doors hung slightly askew, but otherwise, it looked solid, intact. It had a presence the ruined house lacked, a sense of stubborn endurance. It was a survivor. I walked toward it, my boots sinking into the soft earth. A massive, old-fashioned padlock, rusted but formidable, held the door shut. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It felt ancient and purposeful in my hand. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff, and for a moment I thought it wouldn't turn. I put my other hand on it, leaned my weight into it, and with a deep, groaning screech of metal on metal, the lock turned. It clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire property. I pulled the lock free. The chain fell away with a heavy clank. Taking a deep breath, I put my shoulder to the massive door and pushed. It resisted, scraping against the hard-packed dirt floor, and then slowly, reluctantly, it began to move. A vertical slice of light appeared, cutting through the darkness inside. I pushed harder, and the slice widened, spilling dusty, golden afternoon light into the cavernous space within. I stepped inside. The air was thick and still, smelling of old wood, dry hay, engine oil, and something else, something metallic and cool. It was the smell of my father's workshop, amplified 100 times. Dust motes danced like fairies in the shafts of light pouring through the grimy windows high up in the walls. The space was immense. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, crisscrossed with massive timber beams. The floor was a patchwork of packed earth and cracked concrete. And it was full, not cluttered but full. To one side, ancient, hulking shapes stood shrouded in dusty canvas tarps, like sleeping giants. Farm equipment, I guessed. An old tractor, a hay baler, things from a life I couldn't imagine. Along the back wall was a massive workbench, stretching nearly 30 feet long. It was covered in tools, neatly arranged but coated in a thick layer of dust. Vices, clamps, hammers, wrenches of every size, all hanging from a pegboard wall. It was a shrine to forgotten work. I ran my hand along the surface of the workbench, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the dust. I could almost see him standing here, my father, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands, sure and steady, taking something broken and making it whole again. This was his place, his sanctuary. I felt like an intruder, but also like I'd come home. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring, pulling back the dusty tarps. Underneath one was a beautiful, if rust-pocked, vintage Ford pickup truck from the 50s. Under another, a massive metal lathe. Under a third, a table saw the size of a small car. These weren't just a farmer's tools. This was serious, industrial-grade machinery. What was my father, a simple auto mechanic, doing with all this? It didn't make sense. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the barn, a chill started to creep into the air. I had no power, no water, no food beyond a squash protein bar in my bag. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was in the middle of nowhere with no plan and no resources. The brief flicker of hope I'd felt was being extinguished by a rising tide of panic. What was I thinking? That I could just show up here and what? Live in a barn? It was insane. I slumped down on an old wooden crate, my head in my hands. The dream was over. This wasn't a lifeboat. It was just a different way to drown. I'd sell it. I'd call a real estate agent in the nearest big town, sell the land for whatever I could get, pay the back taxes, and use the rest to get a tiny apartment somewhere and start over. It was the sensible thing to do. The only thing to do. My eyes drifted back to the long workbench, the heart of this place. I got up and walked its length, running my hands over the cold steel devices. At the far end, tucked away in the shadows, I noticed something. One section of the wooden front of the bench looked different. The grain of the wood didn't quite match. It was a panel, cleverly disguised. I ran my fingers along the edge and felt a small indentation. I pressed it. With a soft click, the panel popped open. It was a hidden compartment. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red felt, was a metal box. A simple, gray, military-style ammunition can. It was heavy when I lifted it out. On the top, painted in careful white letters, was my name again. Alara. I sat on the workbench and pried open the latches. They were stiff, but they gave way. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a stack of envelopes, tied with a piece of twine. They were addressed to me, and underneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of cash. Neat, tight bricks of $100 bills. I stared, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. I pulled one out. It felt real. I started pulling them all out, stacking them on the dusty bench. There had to be, I didn't know, tens of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. Enough to pay the taxes. Enough to live on for months. Maybe a year. It was a lifeline. A real one. But it was the letters that held my attention. There were 5 of them, the paper thick and creamy. The top one was simply labeled Number 1. With trembling hands, I untied the twine and opened it. The handwriting was my father's, but neater than I remembered, as if he'd taken great care. My dearest Alara, it began. My heart lurched. He had never, not once in my life, called me his dearest. If you're reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I am gone. And for that, I am truly sorry. I hope it was peaceful. Second, it means you have found your way here to this place. And that means you are in trouble. I'm sorry for that, too. More than you can know. I built this place for you. A secret place. A fallback. A fortress, if you need it to be. I started putting it together the day you brought that boy home. Mark. I didn't like him. I saw the way he looked at things, not at people, at things. He was a collector, and I saw him looking at you like his shiniest prize. A man like that, he doesn't build anything. He just acquires. And when he's done with something, he discards it. I knew one day he would try to discard you, and I knew he would try to leave you with nothing. I couldn't tell you this. You were in love. You would have defended him, and you would have hated me for it. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I built you a secret. This barn, this land, it's in your name, and your name only. He can't touch it. It was never a marital asset. It was yours before he was ever in the picture. I had to stop reading. I sank onto the crate again, the letter shaking in my hand. The cash on the bench seemed unreal. This letter, this was real. This was my father's voice, clearer than I had ever heard it when he was alive. He had seen it all. He had known, and he had prepared. I picked up the second letter. The money should be enough to get you on your feet, it continued. Pay the back taxes first. Don't let the county vultures take this place. After that, it's your choice. There's enough there for you to walk away. You can sell the land, the equipment, everything. A local developer, a company called Ridgeview Properties, has been trying to buy up all this land for years. They want to put in one of those soulless housing developments. They'll give you a lowball offer, but it will be fast cash. You could take it and go start a new life somewhere else. No one would blame you. It's the easy way out. But there's another way. The harder way. This barn isn't just a barn, Ellie. And these aren't just a farmer's tools. Before I was a mechanic, before I met your mother, I was something else. I was a metal sculptor. An artist. It was my passion, but it didn't pay the bills, not with a baby on the way. So I put it aside. I got a steady job. I became a practical man. But I never lost the love for it. I built this workshop in secret, over years, piece by piece. All the best equipment. Things I saved for, things I built myself. It was my escape. And my dream was that one day, maybe I could teach you. You always had the eye for it as a little girl. You could see the shapes and things. You had my hands. The world beats that out of you if you let it. I let it. I'm asking you not to. The other option, Ellie, is to stay. The money will give you a runway. You can learn the craft. My craft. In the big chest under the workbench, you'll find all my journals, my sketches, my techniques. Everything I know is in there. You could learn to build things, not just acquire them. You could build a life here, a real one, on your own terms. One that no man can ever take away from you. The choice is yours. The easy road that leads away from here, or the hard road that leads to yourself. I know which one I hope you choose. All my love, Dad. I was sobbing now, deep, shuddering sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the years of misunderstanding between us. I cried for the artist I'd never known, the man who had sacrificed his passion for me. I cried for his fierce, silent, powerful love, a love so deep he had reached across time and death to save me. I looked around the barn at the sleeping machines, the silent tools. It wasn't a ruin. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a legacy, an inheritance of skill and strength, an invitation. The decision felt momentous, a pivot point on which the rest of my life would turn. I spent that night in the cab of the old Ford pickup, wrapped in one of my father's flannel shirts from the box. The air was cold and sharp, and the stars through the cracked windshield were brighter than any I had ever seen in the city. I thought about the easy road, taking the money, selling the land. It was so tempting, a clean slate, a chance to erase the humiliation and pain of the last year. I could get a nice apartment, a safe and comfortable life. But my father's words echoed in my head. A man like that, he doesn't build anything. Mark hadn't built our life. He'd curated it. And when it no longer suited his collection, he'd dismantled it. I had let him. I had become one of his possessions. The thought filled me with a hot, cleansing anger. I didn't want to be acquired ever again. I wanted to build. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew what I had to do. The first thing I did was find a broom. I started in one corner of the barn, sweeping away the thick layers of dust and grime. It was a small, symbolic act. I was claiming this space. I was sweeping out the old life and making room for a new one. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. With every push of the broom, I felt stronger, more real. Later that day, I walked the 2 miles back into town. I used a chunk of the cash to pay the back taxes in full at the small county office. The woman behind the counter, the same one I'd spoken to on the phone, looked at me with new respect. "Glad to see someone's finally taking care of that place," she said, stamping my receipt. "Your father was a good man. Quiet, but a good man." My next stop was the diner. I ordered a huge breakfast, the first real meal I'd had in weeks. It tasted like victory. As I was eating, a man in a crisp polo shirt with a Ridgeview Properties logo embroidered on it came in. He saw me, and a look of recognition, or perhaps opportunity, flashed in his eyes. He slid into the booth opposite me. "You must be Alara Vance," he said, his smile a little too wide. "I'm Tom Jenkins. We've been very interested in your father's property for some time." I was sorry to hear of his passing. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like a shark that had just smelled blood. "We'd be prepared to make you a very generous cash offer. Take that old wreck off your hands. As is. No inspections, no hassle." He slid a business card across the table. "I can have a check in your hand by the end of the week." I looked at his smooth, uncalloused hands. I thought of my father's warning. I thought of the choice. I picked up his card, looked him straight in the eye, and slowly tore it in half. I dropped the pieces onto his side of the table. "The property is not for sale," I said, my voice steady and clear. His smile vanished. His eyes hardened. "That's a mistake, Miss Vance. That land isn't worth much to anyone but us. You're sitting on a liability, not an asset. That's my liability to worry about," I said. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I stood up, paid for my breakfast, and walked out of the diner, leaving him sitting there amidst the pieces of his business card. It was the first time in over a year that I had stood up for myself. It felt incredible. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It means you understand that sometimes the most important moments in our lives aren't the big, loud victories, but the quiet, internal shifts where we decide we are worth fighting for. If you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where you chose the harder road because you knew it was the right one, I want you to let me know in the comments. This community is for people who get it, people who are building their own lives from the ground up. So make sure you're subscribed, because we have a lot more to talk about. Now, let's get back to the barn. The rejection of Ridgeview's offer was a declaration of war, and I knew it. But it was also a promise to myself and to my father's memory. I went back to the barn with a renewed sense of purpose. I opened the large wooden chest my father had mentioned in his letter. Inside, it was exactly as he'd said. Dozens of leather-bound journals, filled with his precise handwriting and detailed sketches. Designs for sculptures, notes on welding techniques, chemical formulas for creating different patinas on metal, thoughts on art and life. It was his entire mind, his soul, committed to paper. There were also photo albums, pictures of him as a young man, lean and intense, with sparks flying from a welding torch. Pictures of his sculptures, beautiful, abstract forms in steel and bronze that seemed to defy gravity. They were incredible. He was a true artist, a talent he had buried for the sake of his family. For me, the weight of that sacrifice settled on me, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. I couldn't let his legacy rust away in this barn. I had to bring it back to life. The first few months were brutal. I used the cash to buy a generator for power, a used pickup truck that was more reliable than the vintage one, and to have a well drilled for water. I learned about plumbing and wiring from my father's books and online videos. I made a small, habitable corner in the barn, partitioning it off with heavy canvas, setting up a cot, a hot plate, and a small wood-burning stove. It was primitive, but it was mine. Every day was a battle. The developer, Tom Jenkins, started playing hardball. I got official-looking letters about zoning violations I didn't understand. A surveyor showed up and put stakes uncomfortably close to my property line. It was a war of attrition. He was trying to intimidate me, to wear me down until I was forced to sell. But every time I felt my resolve waver, I would open one of my father's journals. I started with the basics. He had a whole section on learning to weld. My first attempts were a disaster. I burned through the metal. My lines were shaky and ugly. I got frustrated. I cried. I almost gave up a dozen times. But then I'd read his words. The steel doesn't care about your feelings. It only responds to heat and pressure and a steady hand. Be steady. Be patient. The steel will teach you. So I kept at it. Day after day, I practiced, the bright flare of the welding torch lighting up my small corner of the barn, the smell of hot metal filling the air. Slowly, painstakingly, my weld started to get cleaner. My hands grew steady. I was learning the language of the metal. I also started to connect with the town. It wasn't easy. I was an outsider, a city girl living in a barn. But people were curious. The owner of the hardware store, an old man named Gus, started giving me advice on my projects. He'd known my father, respected him. Your dad was a hell of a fabricator, he told me one day. Could fix or build anything. Good to see his workshop isn't going to waste. The waitress at the diner, a woman my age named Sarah, started saving me a corner booth and would make sure my coffee cup was never empty. She told me about the town, about how Ridgeview Properties have been buying out old family farms, changing the character of the place. A lot of people don't like what they're doing, she said, her voice low. We're glad you're fighting them. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land anymore. I was fighting for a piece of a community. I started small, using scrap metal I found around the barn. I made a simple, sturdy gate for the end of my driveway. I repaired the broken hinges on the barn door. Each small project built my confidence. I was fixing things. I was building. I was becoming the person my father had hoped I would be. My first real artistic project was a weather vane for the top of the barn. I found a sketch for one in my father's journals, a stylized phoenix, wings outstretched, rising from flames. It felt appropriate. It took me a month of painstaking work, cutting the steel, hammering it into shape, welding the pieces together. When it was finally done, I climbed onto the high roof of the barn, my heart in my throat, and bolted it into place. As the wind caught it, the phoenix turned, its metal form catching the morning sun. It was beautiful. It was mine. I had made it. From that vantage point, I could see the whole valley, the patchwork of farms and forests. I saw the stakes the surveyor had put up, the creeping border of the developer's ambition. But from up here, they looked small, insignificant. I had my fortress. I had my craft. I had myself. The legal battle with Ridgeview dragged on. They filed a frivolous lawsuit, claiming my driveway encroached on their newly acquired neighboring property. It was a classic tactic of a wealthy entity trying to bleed a poorer one dry. I had to hire a lawyer from a nearby town, a woman named Ms. Albright, who was sharp and no-nonsense. She looked over the deed my father had left me. "This is ironclad," she said, tapping the paper. "Your father was a smart man. He put the property in a trust for you years ago, with the deed to be transferred upon his death or your legal separation from your husband. He insulated it from your marriage completely. Jenkins has no legal leg to stand on, but he's hoping you don't have the money to prove it in court. The money my father had left was dwindling fast with the legal fees. The pressure was immense. There were days I felt like I was drowning again, that the fight was too much. On those days, I would go to the workbench. I would turn on the lights, fire up the welder, and lose myself in the work. I started making small sculptures, inspired by my father's designs, but with my own twist. I found that I had a voice, a style that was my own. I wasn't just copying him. I was in conversation with him. Gus, from the hardware store, saw some of my pieces one day when he dropped off a delivery. He was impressed. "You should take these to the county market," he said. "People would buy these." The thought terrified me. Showing my work, my soul, to strangers? But I needed the money. So I loaded up my old truck with a few of my best sculptures and drove to the weekend market in the county seat. I set up a small table, my pieces arranged on a piece of black velvet. People walked by, some glancing, most ignoring me. I felt exposed and foolish. Then a woman stopped. She picked up a small, abstract piece I'd made, a swirl of steel that looked like a bird taking flight. "This is lovely," she said. "How much?" I stammered a price, a number I'd pulled out of thin air. "I'll take it," she said, pulling cash from her wallet. That first sale was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there. It wasn't about the money. It was the validation. Someone saw value in what I had created with my own two hands. I sold 2 more pieces that day. It wasn't enough to pay my lawyer, but it was enough to buy more steel, more gas for the welder. It was enough to keep going. The seasons turned. Summer's lush green faded to the fiery colors of autumn, and then to the stark white of winter. The barn was cold, but the wood stove kept my little corner warm, and the fire of the forge kept my spirit alive. I worked relentlessly, honing my craft, building a small inventory of sculptures. The community around me solidified. Sarah from the diner would bring me hot soup on cold days. Gus gave me a line of credit at the hardware store. Ms. Albright, my lawyer, saw my determination and agreed to a payment plan. They were all investing in me, in my fight. They saw it as their fight, too. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. I walked into the small county courthouse, my stomach in knots. Tom Jenkins was there with 2 expensive-looking lawyers in sharp suits. He gave me a condescending smirk. I sat with Ms. Albright, my hands clenched in my lap. The proceedings were dry and technical, a flurry of legal jargon. Jenkins' lawyers argued that the property lines were unclear, that my father's deed was improperly filed. It was all lies and obfuscation. When it was Ms. Albright's turn, she was calm and methodical. She presented the original survey maps. She presented the notarized deed. She presented the trust documents my father had set up. It was an open and shut case. The judge, a stern-faced woman who looked like she'd seen it all, didn't take long to make her decision. She dismissed the lawsuit and fined Ridgeview Properties for filing a frivolous claim. She looked at me from the bench. "Miss Vance," she said, "welcome to Silver Creek. I hope you stay." I walked out of that courthouse into the bright, cold winter air, and I felt 10 feet tall. Jenkins brushed past me, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," he hissed. "It is for me," I said, and I kept walking. That victory was a turning point. The town saw that I had won, that the big developer wasn't invincible. The story spread. A reporter from the regional paper came out and did a story on me. City woman finds new life and artistic calling in ancestral barn, fends off developer. It was a bit dramatic, but it was true, and it changed everything. People started seeking me out, not just from a market, but from galleries in nearby cities. An art dealer from the capital saw the article and drove out to the barn. She walked through my workshop, her eyes wide, looking at my sculptures and some of my father's original pieces that I had carefully restored. "This is incredible," she said, running a hand over a large, abstract piece I had just finished. "The story, the legacy, it's all here. I want to represent you. I want to give you a solo show, a solo show." The words barely registered. Me in a gallery? It was a dream I would have never even dared to have. I had spent so long just trying to survive, I hadn't thought about what it would mean to thrive. I thought of my father, of his buried dreams. This was for him as much as it was for me. I said yes. The months leading up to the show were a frenzy of creation. I worked day and night, pushing my skills to their limit, pouring all the pain, the grief, the anger, and the hope of the last few years into the steel. I was telling my story and my father's story through metal. The night of the opening was surreal. The gallery was bright and clean, a world away from my dusty barn. My sculptures stood on white pedestals, lit by spotlights. And people were there. Lots of people. Gus and Sarah drove in from Silver Creek. Ms. Albright was there, smiling. People were looking at my work, talking about it, connecting with it. I saw little red dots appearing next to the pieces. Sold. By the end of the night, almost everything had sold. I had made more money in one night than Mark made in 6 months. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was standing there, in that room full of my creations, and knowing that I had built this. I had taken the worst moment of my life and forged it into something strong and beautiful. I had found my father's legacy, and in doing so, I had found myself. I still live in the barn. It's more comfortable now. I've built a proper apartment inside one end of it, with real walls and a real kitchen. But the workshop is still the heart of the place. It's where I go to think, to create, to feel close to my father. I never saw Mark again. I heard through the grapevine that his new life wasn't as perfect as he'd imagined. But honestly, I don't think about him much. He's a ghost from a different life, a life that no longer belongs to me. My life is here, in Silver Creek, in the smell of hot metal and the sound of the wind in the pines. It's in the solid weight of a hammer in my hand. Home isn't always a place you're given. Sometimes it's a place you have to build, with your own 2 hands, out of the rubble of what came before. It's not about the 4 walls around you. It's about the foundation you lay for yourself. My inheritance wasn't just a barn and some money. It was a second chance. It was a roadmap back to myself, left by a father who loved me enough to plan for my darkest day. He taught me that the strongest things are forged in fire. What this story has taught me, and what I wanted to teach you, is that your foundation is stronger than you think. Even when everything on the surface has been stripped away, there is something solid underneath. You just have to be brave enough to start digging, to start building again. If you have a story of rebuilding, of finding strength when you thought you had none left, I want you to share in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. They are part of the foundation of this community. And if you want to be a part of a place that believes in second chances, a place that knows we are all stronger than we think,
Let's do... Here we go. And it is what it is. This is like Pokemon game number 4 within 3 months. I'll take it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna play it, to be honest. I was really kind of hoping for more of like a Pokemon Coliseum vibe. That wasn't free to play. I mean, that was just like a regular game. But it sounds like they're not doing that, and they're kind of going for like the microtransaction route, which I'm not going to entertain. What are you doing in the game now? Stealing, Emma. But also, wait, we should check. Is there a legendary Pokemon here? Let's see. All in this area? Oh my god, Mewtwo's on this island somewhere. That's our first legendary, guys. Yeah, Emma, so they have these like dream islands that you can come visit every day. It's like once a day. And pretty much anything that's here, you can just take. So yeah. I will be taking everything. Even this like little starting base area. Don't mind if I do. There's been a Mewtwo there this whole time. I go there to also steal materials. That's amazing, November. I do know it's a chance, so you should definitely check. Hey, Roland. Good to see you. And also, thanks for hopping in, November. Appreciate it. Exploiting the land and the peoples, Emma. Well, okay, here's the thing, Hard Eyes. There are no peoples, right? So how do you exploit them if they're not even on the planet anymore? I don't know if I want these crates though. Being perfectly honest. We'll take the walkway. I should also check to see what kind of berries are on this island. Looks like a Rost berries.